Okay, so we're live, right? Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. How's that? Seems like a good moment. I thought there was some diabolical laughter there somewhere. How is this? How are you doing? How is it, Reza? Now you're here. We can fucking start if you don't mind. You're going to enjoy the show. Believe me. Listen, you're going to enjoy the show. I promise you it won't be like any lecture you've ever seen in your life. No. Sound is good? Okay, let me take... Yeah. Fingers crossed, fingers crossed. Hello. Welcome, everybody. to the College of Foreign Language and Literature. My name's Jason Barker, and you may have been expecting to see Reza Negarestani today. Reza unfortunately has pulled out of today's lecture, the lecture he'd planned, and so I've decided to present my own impromptu. The title is University of the Dark Arts on the 150th anniversary of the Bloody Week. The human condition of modernity, I once told my friend Oliver Feltham, is not angst, it's boredom. You're too French, he'd tell me. He was right. From the age of 8, France had been that other world I'd disappeared to in the holidays. In the 1970s, you couldn't come back from the continent and talk about the great time you'd had. There was no language for it. People had to accept you'd been to France, and that was that. France, they'd exclaim, intrigue belying horror. Ooh. Oliver was also an alien in France, but as I hurtled inebriated to the metro to catch the last train from Saint-Lazare, as I did most Thursday nights after dining at the Olivier's, what did he really mean? I'm too French? Did he mean I was royalist? Oliver lived in Paris. I lived in Versailles. I was fleeing the capital. He was staying put. Fleeing to safety. Siding with the propertied classes, or at least serving the elite children of the French ruling class, many of whom will today be actively involved in President Macron's Republic of Anti-Intellectualism. The École Prépa, where I worked, was one of France's leading preparatory schools for the grandes écoles and careers in the upper echelons of the military-industrial complex. Since I was resident of the school where I worked, I had ample time to talk to the boarders and inquire about their future plans. They were wonderfully bright and amiable youngsters, most of them quite brilliant, who were curious about the strange Englishman who, rumour had it, would creep back to the school gone midnight. A cultivated air of boredom prevailed. In my English classes too, the subject could switch abruptly from Sarkozy's latest controversial remark to the different types of snow. Were they related? No doubt. But the impulse was one of randomness. A colleague and some students set up GAG, the Groupe Anti-Philosophie de Ginette, a reading group in literature and logic. When I presented them a paper on Alain Badiou, who none of them had read, one of the students objected to Badiou's interpretation of Paul Cohen's independence proof. There was also a failed endeavour to write and produce a short film with the Parisian film collective Dojo Cinema. École Sainte-Geneviève was a loose approximation of what Antonio Gramsci called the common school. All-round education. In fact, it went beyond that. All the needs and accoutrements of one's social life and physical well-being were provided for in the community of young scholars. Every imaginable sporting facility was there. Every club and society. There were canteens, laundry, library, cinema, a doctor's surgery, a nature ramble. It often struck me how empty the place was during the holidays. Why go to Paris or anywhere else when there was never any reason to leave? The only thing the school didn't produce was its own food. There was once briefly another French common school which, like Jeanette, was encircled by a great big wall for keeping out the barbarians. A university of life. Much is made of the educational reforms and secularism of the Paris Commune, although I won't infer any educational model from its war communism, and simply observe that parents in the situation would have been unlikely to tell their children, "Don't waste your time reading philosophy. How's that going to get you a job?" To which the student of today could reply, "I have no idea, but hang on, I'll check my app." Technology, despite its antisocial abuses of power, at least offers the illusion that every cloud has a silver lining, that the unspeakable horrors lurking a mere click away are curatable, and that there is convenience in the monadological intrusion of the entire universe into one's private life. Is this a viable model for education? A lesson in arithmetic nestled alongside cryptocurrency tickers, live sports, and home delivery services? A simple historical reminder is in order. During the first industrial revolution of the 18th and 19th centuries, workers managed to limit the working day through bitter and bloody struggles, resulting in the legislation of the British Parliament. Most of the factory acts date from the first half of the 19th century. How did Victorian capitalists respond to the curtailment of surplus value production? The answer is by inventing machines that increased productivity, which is to say, boosting output at the expense of wages. If 2 yards of linen can be produced in the semi-automated textile factory in the same time that it previously took to produce one, then 50% of the worker's labour time has cost the capitalist nothing. In Capital, in his chapter on relative surplus value, Marx demolishes the myth that good employees will share in the fruits of their labour. The more productive they become, the less workers will earn as a proportion of output, all else being equal. Labour productivity is a euphemism for commercial suicide. In the factory, the grave diggers are digging their own graves. Another widespread misunderstanding is that technology is nature's way of alleviating the burden of work. But even liberals like John Stuart Mill recognised that the invention of automated machines was never about making mental or manual work easier. What it's about, says Marx, is increasing the proportion of work that counts as surplus value and can be converted to profit. Machines aren't going to replace workers, not now or in the future fairy tale communism. What they do threaten to do, however, is decrease wages and consign skilled labourers to the scrap heap. Technology under capitalism is simply any form of work or practice, including algorithms, requiring human intervention. Factory bondage as much as screen time. By human, I simply mean non-automated. And consider too that once the AI bot becomes the standard labouring unit, it's the robots, not human employees, who will be receiving the most valuable employee award at the annual company dinner and dance, while the humans, a few of the lucky ones, are retained as waiters, shoe polishers and coat attendants for the robots, their wives and other robot dignitaries. As Marx says, capitalism does a great line in servants. So much for fully automated luxury communism. It was in America that modern computing would move away from Alan Turing's preoccupation with the abstract problem of building a brain and begin devising algorithms to speed up or simplify data retrieval. In heuristic search, there are possible solutions to every problem, no matter how improbable. Recall in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy when the infinite improbability drive calculates the chances of 2 nuclear missiles transforming themselves into a bunch of petunias and a sperm whale as 8,767,128 to 1 against. As absurd as the probabilistic modelling of thought may be, it was widely adopted in behavioural studies by American economists in the 1950s and 60s. We are all Pavlovian dogs now, with the attention spans of goldfish. Or maybe we're all goldfish, under the spell of a malicious demon. Probabilistic data modelling is widespread in the development and marketing of commodities. One such model is the information paradox, devised in 1962 by Kenneth Arrow as a means of ensuring and protecting intellectual property. Knowledge is a byproduct of proof. In achieving knowledge, students will learn the truth paradox, which proves A equals A. The so-called paradox is that since knowledge is a marketable commodity, its free transfer to the customer puts the seller at a disadvantage. The solution? Devise a zero knowledge proof whereby the only knowledge being transferred by the seller to the customer is the contractual guarantee that the knowledge has in fact successfully been transferred. Of course, what's been learned in the process, or how, is irrelevant. In fact, nothing has, strictly speaking, been learned. The learning process doesn't even come into it. The zero knowledge protocol is knowledge without proof. Not only is the truth procedure irrelevant, it's impossible. The student doesn't know how they passed or failed the examination, only that they passed or failed. They cannot know. In any case, the customer doesn't care. Don't worry, you've passed. It's all explained in the contract. Behold the techno-charged capitalism more frightful than the spectre of communism, which, in any case, Marx and Engels dismiss in their famous preamble to the Communist Manifesto. It's a nursery tale, they tell us, before proceeding to address their non-existent Communist Party. University professors, if you aren't petrified by zero knowledge proofs and information paradox of the possibility that you yourselves might be replicants on the front line of a new form of education, the nefarious consequences of which even the unholy alliance of vice-chancellors and tech innovators have yet to fully grasp, then you're not doing your jobs properly. I repeat, the spectre of communism, conjured up from the bottomless wells of liberal, fascist, nationalist, conservative, social democrat, centrist and extremist imaginations, in fact from every shade of actually existing political doxa, is not to be feared. There's more to worry about in the big data sets being generated on our backs. For the 2 months of its existence, from the 18th of March 1871, the Paris Commune would inspire a terrifying, tyrannical and narcissistic vision of a society
gone to hell. A bloody horror story. A negative apparition that would unify the hearts and minds of the good people of Versailles, contrive a sense of national pride and class solidarity among people whose ruling class had conspired in the Prussian occupation of France. During the Commune, Prussians was used euphemistically by Parisians to mean the royalist government of France based in Versailles. It goes without saying that the good people of Versailles, who during the siege of Paris would line the leafy avenues of their hometown to throw bricks and poke out the eyes of captured Parisians, would never dream of telling their children to stop reading philosophy because it won't help get them a job. Let me hazard the following remark. The spectres belong in the university. I propose to usher them in. All of them. The most ghoulish and horrifying apparitions imaginable. You are welcome here, spectres. You'll surely feel at home in this bleak monadological container. More welcome than the shiny robots of the service economy, one of whom scans my temperature each morning at the main entrance. I've come to pity that poor, uncomplaining creature. It's time Adolf had a day off. I have summoned you here, spectres, to a theatre. Am I being anachronistic? Aren't we supposed to be remote workers now, avatars of our true selves, absolved of the worry to actually be here or do anything? Imagine news of King Hamlet's death arriving by registered courier, or his son receiving a text message or emoji instead of encountering the ghost on the ramparts, or any of the Greek tragedies being performed, let alone written, without the polysemy of Delphic prophecy, of extraterrestrial encounters. All education is anachronistic, a futuristic and outdated process, out of joint, out of step, out of sync with what's happening over the ramparts. In education, we strive to make contact with the other side, on the strict understanding that what we strive to make contact with is untranslatable or incommunicable to the uninitiated. Which is not to say truth is a monstrous illusion, a narcissistic reflection, an abyss that stares back. In tragedy, the ghost is both congealed time, memory, and time's arrow, mapping the trajectory of the past to its target. Rarely, if ever, does the protagonist hit the target, although they may, ultimately, learn why. This is the drama of education. It is an imitation, serious, incomplete, and measured, of the world outside. Thomas de Quincey, show yourself, ghost. I want to offer you a job in the University of the Dark Arts. In On the Knocking on the Gate in Macbeth, de Quincey, a famed opium fiend, writes of the tragic effect of Shakespeare's Scottish play. It's a wonderful passage that should be nailed to the door of every school of learning. De Quincey writes, "We must be made sensible that the world of ordinary life is suddenly arrested, laid asleep, tranced, racked into a dread armistice. Time must be annihilated, relation to things without abolished, and all must pass, self-withdrawn, into a deep syncope and suspension of earthly passion. Hence it is that when the deed is done, when the work of darkness is perfect, then the world of darkness passes away like a pageantry in the clouds. The knocking at the gate is heard, and it makes known audibly that the reaction has commenced. The human has made its reflux upon the fiendish. The pulses of life are beginning to beat again, and the re-establishment of the goings-on of the world in which we live first makes us profoundly sensible of the awful parenthesis that had suspended them. End of quote. Let us embrace De Quincey's theory of dark drama. The arrest of ordinary life, the annihilation of time and of the relation of things, withdrawal into a deep syncope and the suspension of earthly passion, the cultivation of hypnagogic states, along with a general propensity for all things shadowy, have the virtue of questioning one's right state of mind. Recall that De Quincey had hallucinations from an early age, or at least that's what the opium fiend would later recall. The theory of education I'm tentatively laying before you is not some shock therapy. Brechtian estrangement is utterly exhausted. The bourgeoisie are perfectly attuned to it. It's what they call extreme sports. Our plans are far more modest. God forbid anyone would want to involve the modern university in changing the world. We want no part of the world or worldly goods. We may be in a morgue, but there's more life here than outside. We are saving the outside, renewing it from the inside out. Make no bones about it. Let the bourgeoisie, those good people of Versailles, among other official acropolises outdoing the most colossal concept of modern barbarity, sacrifice their youth in the name of education. We are the Pied Pipers of the intellect, lords of dithyrambic dance. We don't pretend to be running a career service here. Years ago, I had a telephone conversation with a worried parent whose daughter is distinguished as the most appalling student ever to set foot in my class. The mother was beside herself. Chloe, let's call her Chloe, had failed her first year of undergraduate study, which was a disaster, since the mother had spent a fortune on Chloe's summer camp in Hawaii. What the mother needed from me were assurances that everything was going to be all right and that Chloe could pass her first year. In an ideal university, such failures would be no cause for concern. Chloe wouldn't be going to Hawaii. In fact, you couldn't drag her there with a team of men in white coats. Chloe's mother would telephone, and the conversation would go something like this. Hello, Jason Barker speaking. Oh, Professor Barker, yes. It's Chloe's mother here. I am beside myself with worry. Oh, why, Chloe's mother? Whatever's the matter? Well, Professor Barker, it's all these strange stories I've been hearing. Stories? I don't follow you, Chloe's mother. Yes, stories about the university. Oh, I see. Well, yes. If only I had your assurances, Professor Barker, that Chloe was doing something truly horrifying in there, something utterly deranged and incomprehensible, then my mind would be at rest. Let me just put it like that. Zombies, you are welcome here too. Enough of puerile Cold War depictions of lobotomized communists or racist stereotypes of the black disease. You have nothing to fear from the world or from yourselves. Purgatory is a place more fearful for the good people of Versailles than it is for us. In the ideal university, I long to see the good people banging on the doors to be let in, just to see the petrified looks on their faces when they see their own reflections in the glass. For the monads don't see out. They are blind to such horrors. One might object that the whole point of the university is de-zombification. Wasn't Haitian liberation theology of the 1980s all about good sel, tasting salt? In Haitian voodoo folklore, the zombie was the colonial plantation slave who botched his own suicide. Having consumed poison, the ultimate indignity for the slave would be to wake up and discover that instead of being transported back to Languinay, the voodoo name for Africa, the slave was dead but still enslaved. Hence the myth of the undead, conscienceless slave of Cold War Hollywood cinema. According to the folklore, by feeding the zombie salt, having previously been force-fed bland food, they finally revive. Is that the objective here? Liberating the slave from the plantation so they can attend Bible classes? Let's not belittle l'Église, the Haitian liberation movement, in its courageous resistance to the Duvalier's 30-year dictatorship. It wasn't dealing in spiritual transcendence. But when it comes to the modern university, the question is this: what are the zombies being revived for? What service is the university providing them in so doing? Where is the promised land? Remain with us, zombies. Rest in purgatory. Stay undead. The capitalist slave driver would only have you replaced by a robot. You, however, must steal yourself from his property, subtract yourself from his balance sheet, poison his plantation. Not even the dead will be safe, Walter Benjamin opines, if the enemy is victorious. More manifest hyperbole. The enemy has already won. They caught us napping. They came like a thief in the night. They won't stop. Don't worry about yourselves or future generations of slaves in the concentration camps of hothouse earth. Worry instead about becoming like them, the good people of Versailles, bored, miserable, petrified of their own shadows, whose patriotic duty in 1871 was to sell out their own country for the sake of a couple of million francs in commission, not forgetting the 20,000 men, women and children, according to Lissagre, killed during the Bloody Week, after the fighting in Paris and in the provinces. Poor people murdered for standing in the path of progress. Spectres and zombies. The sacred hour is upon us. Bolt the doors on the university. Switch off the lights and let us commence our shadowy thinking in its dark and lonely chambers. Until the knocking at the gate is heard, the pulses of life begin to beat again, and we are profoundly sensible of the awful parenthesis that had suspended them. Thank you very much.